welcome to BBC World News. I'm David Eads. Our top story this hour. More shelter, but also more controls. EU countries agree on limited measures to manage the flow of migrants as winter draws ever closer. Poland takes a step to the right as the Conservative Law and Justice Party win parliamentary elections with a tough message for the EU and for migrants. At least 5 people have died after a whale-watching boat sank off the west coast of Canada. More than 20 people were rescued. 1 is still missing. Formula One driver Lewis Hamilton says he's lost for words after winning the World Championship for a 3rd time. And from tug-of-war to archery, the first World Indigenous Games is underway in Rio, a year ahead of the Olympics. Thanks very much for joining us. Well, more shelters for another 100,000 migrants. More police officers also for Slovenia and Greece. Those are just 2 of the 17 different measures agreed by countries across Central Europe and the Balkans to tackle the non-stop flow of migrants into the region. Now, those decisions taken in Brussels do little to address the role of Turkey, for example, in limiting the numbers actually crossing into mainland Europe. But the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, nonetheless stressed the importance of individual EU member states taking a more responsible approach towards migrants reaching their territory. Here's a bit of what he had to say after the meeting.
The only way to restore order to the situation is to slow down the uncontrolled flows of people. The policy of waving through people to neighbouring countries has to stop. I want to be clear. People must be registered. No registration, no rights. Leaders meeting today all committed, first of all, to sharing information about flows, and second of all, to refrain from taking unilateral decisions whose effects are inevitably borne by others.
No registration, no rights. Now, our correspondent Lucy Williamson has been following the talks in Brussels. She sent this report.
Well, it was, by all accounts, a pretty tough meeting, and the proposals that were agreed on at the end were quite modest. But Jean-Claude Juncker did get some of what he wanted. He got an extra 100,000 reception places for asylum seekers, half of them to be in Greece and half along the rest of the migration route. He also got agreement to send extra forces to Greece to help protect the borders there, and also an extra 400 police to go to Slovenia to try and help protect the border there. He also got a commitment, one of his key proposals, a commitment from member states not to simply wave migrants and refugees through their territory and on to the next one, but to try and discourage them from moving on until the neighbouring country had been informed. He wanted more cooperation throughout the region, he said. But it was quite difficult to get the level of cooperation that he was after. There was a lot of sharp words, there were a lot of grumbling going on, and there was one theme that kept recurring again and again from different leaders, and that was Turkey. There can be no real full solution to this crisis without Turkey, they said, and anything else was tinkering around the edges.
That's Lucy Williamson in Brussels. As we've been hearing then, one of the proposals is to strengthen border controls. European leaders under renewed pressure after Hungary's decision, of course, to close its borders, and that forced tens of thousands of people to take a new route up from Greece. Our correspondent Richard Galpin reports now from the frontier between Slovenia and Croatia.
Croatian police officers escort yet another trainload of refugees and migrants to the border with Slovenia. This part of a major operation, sending thousands across into Slovenia every day, regardless of whether the authorities there are willing to receive them. Once on Slovenian soil, they are soon picked up by the local security forces, but they are not welcome here and have to walk 10 kilometres to the nearest camp under the watchful eyes of armed police and soldiers carrying automatic weapons. Ala Adin, a Syrian refugee, tells me they're not getting any help along the way. And they're not giving you any water?
No, anything. Just we ask the police. Now I ask one police, he tell me, I'm sorry, it's not my job to give you. I say, yes, it's not your job, just please, just help me.
And this is the crowded transit camp where they all end up. Here, conditions not much better, with people complaining there's not enough food or shelter. It's all taking a toll on the most vulnerable, with the increasing cold making things even worse. And what we're hearing now from aid workers and also from a doctor inside the camp is that there have been several cases of hypothermia. And that's because some people inside the camp are having to sleep out rough at night on the ground. But they're soon being moved on to the border with Austria. Slovenia, like many countries in this region, wants this influx of refugees and migrants to stop and is doing all it can to discourage them. Jagalpin, BBC News in the Balkans.
Well, if you want more on this is the place to go. We've got some extraordinary figures on our website for you. The number of migrants arriving in Greece in 4 days, from the 17th to the 21st of October, 47,985. The figures are there on the website. More figures to go with that, and a lot of the background, of course, to the current state of affairs. So do take a look. bbc.com/news. Well, a major shift in Poland's political landscape as the opposition Law and Justice Party, which is vehemently anti-immigration, has won a handsome victory in parliamentary elections. An exit poll suggests the Eurosceptic party secured 39% of the vote, and that would be enough to govern on its own. Well, the first official results due in a matter of a few hours' time. Adam Easton is in Warsaw, been following it all for us. Adam, I mean, it's fair to say it's a thumping victory. What was the key to that?
I think the key to it was people had grown weary of the governing centre-right civic platform. This may seem surprising to people. Poland's more prosperous than it's ever been. It's leading the way in Europe in terms of economic growth. It's been very impressive. But unfortunately, that economic growth is not spread equally around the country. There are very poor areas of Poland, much poorer than Western Europe. Young graduates as well feel that they don't have the prospects in Poland, and often they go to Western Europe to seek better paid jobs there. There was just a general feeling in Poland that the benefits of that economic growth had not been felt by many people, and the Conservative Law and Justice Party took advantage of that, and they offered some very simple, concrete sort of policies which were increased state benefits for people, increased child support, also lowering the tax threshold for people who are less well off. And they've really reaped the benefits of this apathy that people perceived that the government had drifted into, almost that the government had become aloof from ordinary people's problems.
Right, and how much of an issue has the whole migrant crisis been? Because I think the government was relatively open to taking a relatively small number of people in, but nonetheless open to do that.
Yes, that's right. The centre-right civic platform agreed to the European Commission's plan to take in the quota that it was allocated, which is close to 10,000 migrants, which is not a lot for a country which is close to 40 million in its population. But there will be a change now with the Law and Justice Party, which certainly in the election made much of the fact that it was against receiving large numbers of migrants. It does not want to have the European Commission impose a number, an obligatory quota on the country. And in fact, the leader of the Law and Justice Party caused a lot of controversy here when he's talked about how migrants from the Middle East would bring with them dangerous diseases. So certainly a shift on migrant policy here, but I'm not sure whether that was the key issue in the election. I think, again, it was sort of apathy towards the government after 8 years,
right,
and the feeling that people are not feeling the benefits of that economic growth.
There will, Adam, also be, briefly, a swing, won't there, in terms of approach towards Russia and maybe greater sense of antagonism. Obviously, Yaroslav Kaczynski's brother, Lech, his history, the way in which perhaps this party would perceive relations with Russia, is that a worry?
Certainly, given the previous Law and Justice government about 10 years ago, the government would probably be, Parliament would be more closed-minded, less open, less engaged with the European Union, less closer relations with Germany, for example, and certainly continue the sort of policy in Poland, which is huge scepticism, in fact, probably more scepticism towards Moscow.
OK, Adam, thank you very much indeed. Adam Easton with the latest. And, of course, as soon as those results are official, we will bring them to you. Change of scene now, as Lewis Hamilton has become only the second British driver after Sir Jackie Stewart to win 3 Formula One titles. Hamilton sealed his triumph in the US Grand Prix in Texas, against many people's expectations, actually, for this race. Here's Ben Bland.
It was a result that had Lewis Hamilton leaping with joy and landing even further in the F1 history books, now with 3 Formula One titles to his name. At the Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas, he led on the first lap. During the race, the advantage then swung between Hamilton and his teammate, the fellow Mercedes driver Nico Rosberg of Germany. It was an aggressive battle between the two. A crucial error by Rosberg, though, on lap 48 of 56, saw him lose traction out of a hairpin turn, allowing Hamilton to sweep into the lead. After that, the checkered flag was the British drivers for the taking. Lewis Hamilton, 30 years old and world champion for the 3rd time. A congratulatory word from Sir Jackie Stewart, the only other British driver to have won as many F1 titles. Photos on the podium and then the champagne flowed. Amazing, Hamilton told Sir Elton John during an interview. I can't find the right words to tell you how amazing this feels. But then again, his beaming smile seemed to say it all. Ben Bland, BBC News.
Quite something when you've got Elton John muscling in on an occasion like that, isn't it? Now, let's get a roundup of some other main stories. Police in the US state of Oklahoma have charged a woman with 4 counts of murder after a car crashed into a street parade on Saturday. The woman was arrested on suspicion of drink driving. Her lawyer denied she'd been drinking. He said she'd suffered mental health problems. A former comedian has won Guatemala's presidential election after a second-round runoff. Jimmy Morales, a political novice, has campaigned against corruption and secured nearly 70% of the votes. His rival, the former First Lady Sandra Torres, has accepted defeat. A whale-watching boat has sunk off the coast of British Columbia in Canada, leaving at least 5 people dead. The boat was travelling off Tofino on Vancouver Island in the west of the country. A search and rescue operation is underway. Our correspondent Peter Bowes is covering the story for us from Los Angeles.
The authorities are concentrating on the rescue effort, which has been going on for several hours, but no doubt there will be, of course, an investigation into why this happened. Perhaps there was some sort of mechanical failure on the vessel. Those questions still remain to be answered. The rescue operation is far from over, and it has, as I say, lasted some time. This happened in the middle of Sunday afternoon local time, and a Mayday call was made, and local people talk of seeing many ambulances rushing to the scene. People were taken ashore, those who survived, in some cases taken into local people's homes just to warm them up after they'd spent several hours in the water. Others were taken to hospital and are still being treated.
Peter Bowes there. Do stay with us here on BBC World News. Still to come, rebuilding Nepal. 6 months after the earthquake, the struggle to rehouse thousands of people before winter is on.
Indira Gandhi, ruler of the world's largest democracy, died today. Only yesterday she'd spoken of dying in the service of her country and said, "I would be proud of it. Every drop of my blood will contribute to the growth of this nation."
After 46 years of unhappiness, these two countries have concluded a chapter of history.
No more suspicion, no more fear, no more uncertainty of what each day might bring.
Booster ignition and liftoff of Discovery with a crew of 6 astronaut heroes and 1 American legend.
Boy, enjoying the show is right. This is beautiful.
A milestone in human history. Born today, this girl in India is the 7 billionth person on the planet.
You're watching BBC World News. I'm David Eads. The latest headlines. Leaders from Central European countries and Balkan states have agreed a 17-point plan to tackle the migrant crisis. A whale-watching boat has sunk off the west coast of Canada. At least 5 people have died. A rescue operation is continuing. Divorced and civilly remarried Catholics may receive, well, a warmer welcome from the Church now after a historic meeting of bishops in Rome. Pope Francis had called for a more merciful and less judgmental Church at the synod held specifically to debate family issues. There was no offer of a softening of doctrine on homosexuality, though. Our religious affairs correspondent Caroline Wyatt reports from Rome.
This is a pope whose message of mercy has proved popular with the people. Pope Francis today made it clear he wants a compassionate church that understands more and condemns less. But his synod of bishops has proved less popular with some in the church, who say that it's let loose confusion among the faithful. The message that's rung out from the Vatican in recent weeks has sometimes been discordant and is being heard in many different ways. Some say this synod may have opened a path towards divorced and remarried Catholics being able to take communion, although the wording was left vague.
It says we have to find fresh ways of accompanying families at every stage in their lives, and that's particularly true for those who've experienced hardship and hurt and breakdown and maybe have entered into second marriages.
The signals from this synod have been so ambiguous as to allow both the Liberals to claim victory and Conservatives to point out that no doctrine has been changed.
They would rewrite the teachings of the Church on sexuality, marriage and the family in the light of modern understandings. Well, for us, for Orthodox Christians in every Christian denomination, it's the first and normative word is the teachings of Jesus Christ.
Back in the UK, the faithful at Mass at St Lawrence Church in Feltham were also trying to decode the signs coming from Rome. And there were mixed views on whether the Church should offer communion to the civilly remarried.
I do not believe in divorce, but it depends on each person.
God is all about forgiveness, I suppose, isn't he? So if you do get divorced, then maybe, you should be allowed.
Here in Rome, the Pope must now work out what he wants after hearing his bishop's advice. Many here are worried about the deep divisions that have been revealed within the Roman Catholic Church. No one's quite sure where all of this leads, but they say Pope Francis will have to handle the fallout with care if it's not to divide his flock. Caroline Wyatt, BBC News, Rome.
It's 6 months now since an earthquake hit Nepal, killing more than 8,000 people, with hundreds of thousands left homeless. In some areas, the quake flattened 98% of all the houses. It was the worst natural disaster to hit the country since 1934, and it's no surprise the country is still struggling to cope. Our South Asia editor, Joanna Jolly, has this report.
When the ground shook on April the 25th, it came as no surprise to the Nepalese people. The country had been living under the threat of a major earthquake for decades, but it was still unprepared for the destruction that followed. In the capital, Kathmandu, ancient monuments collapsed in seconds, burying dozens of people. But the worst damage was in more remote towns and villages, where whole streets were reduced to piles of rubble. The international community responded immediately, and Nepal was given thousands of dollars in aid. But 6 months on, many of those affected are still in need of help.
Where we used to live, we no longer have a home, and we have no money. The area is very remote, and we don't have enough land to rebuild or grow anything there.
Continuing aftershocks in the summer monsoon have delayed rebuilding efforts, and now there's a race to provide shelter and food before the winter snow. But aid workers are facing a new challenge. Nepal is in the grip of an acute fuel shortage because of protests in the country's southern plains over a new constitution. Angry demonstrators have blocked fuel trucks from India from entering the country, and many people also accuse India of unofficially supporting this protest. Nepal has recently elected a new prime minister, and there are hopes he can solve this crisis and restart aid efforts. If not, those hit by the earthquake will struggle to survive when winter sets in. Joanna Jolly, BBC News.
I'm going to bring you some more now on our main story this hour, Europe's migrant crisis. After Syria, the next largest group of migrants comes from Afghanistan. Fighting, of course, still going on there. And most of those who do cross into Europe do so with the help of smugglers. In an exclusive interview, an Afghan smuggler revealed more about this lucrative trade. He's been speaking to the BBC's Shaima Khalil.
Tell me, what kind of people come to you? Is it mainly young people, for example, students, or is it older ones, families? Do families come to you?
Most of my customers are youngsters. Families are going too. I personally first check that they are healthy, that they're not too old, or that the children aren't too small. I don't take pregnant women. The most dangerous part is between Turkey and Greece. People get shot by the police, and sometimes the boats capsize. Some boats are not good, you know. They can't handle the journey.
So once you've taken the money and you're sending them on the way, can you guarantee their safety?
No, I can't guarantee their safety, but I do explain the dangers to them. I would say to them things like, on the way to Europe, you might get sick, you might get stopped by the police, the boats might capsize. But Allah would guarantee their safety, not me.
I mean, you say this is a dangerous journey, sending people, not guaranteeing their safety. Why do you do this job?
Look, people are coming to me and asking me to send them. I'm not forcing anyone to go. I'm not the only one who's smuggling. There are many people doing this job. I do it because it's an easy job to do.
The people that you smuggle will cross the border. Some may get turned back. Some may get maltreated, abused. Others may die on the way. I mean, some would say that you're using people, you're taking their money and putting them in harm's way.
Look, I have smuggled 3 of my own sons. People come to me and say, you've sent your own sons, you can send us too. So I do. Living and dying is in the hands of God. But since I have sent people, no one has died, not the ones I have sent. One of our relatives was receiving threats from militiamen in Afghanistan. His family came asking me to smuggle him, so I did. They said, you've saved our son's life. They are praying for me.
Do you think you're helping people?
In my opinion, what I am doing is not good. But when people ask me to help them, then I think I'm doing a good job. When anyone gets deported, I pay their money back. There's one thing I want to add. You think if we had a secure country, people would go? Why would anyone want to be a migrant or a refugee?
What's the hardest thing about your job?
I know how parents feel when they send their sons away, because I also sent 3 sons. I get upset when I see parents crying. I don't like my job very much, you know. I feel guilty sometimes.
Now, less than a year to go before the Rio Olympics, and Brazil is playing host to the first World Indigenous Games. Almost 50 ethnic groups from all over the globe are gathered in the city of Palmas in the Amazon region for a very colourful sporting and political spectacle. Here's Julia Canera.
This is the first tug-of-war competition here in the World Indigenous Games. They're just awaiting the whistle. There it goes. Okay, you have Philippines on one side here, and further ahead, the United States. They're pretty much digging a hole into the sand here with all the strength that they're pulling. These are the first ever World Indigenous Games being held here in Brazil, with almost 50 different ethnic groups from Brazil and also from many different countries. As well as these groups here, there are groups from Canada, from Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, and they're all queuing up, waiting for their turn to compete. This stadium here is packed with people who came to watch these competitions. They're all free for the people of the city to come and watch. You can really tell by the variety of headdresses and of body paint that people here have. It's a sign of the different traditions that they followed. And parallel to the games, Games, there are also protests being planned over the next few days. Just a while ago, a group pulled out banners calling for the end of indigenous genocide, as they called it, and calling for Brazil's President Dilma Rousseff to protect land rights. They're protesting against the project that's due to be voted in Congress this week that will make it a lot more difficult for indigenous land to be protected and regulated. And now this Brazilian tribe has won and is celebrating their victory. Everyone from the delegation joining in to celebrate.
Triumph for one lot there at the Indigenous Games. Triumph also for Canadian pop singer Justin Bieber, because he's made a triumphant return to the European stage. At the MTV Europe Music Awards in Milan, he picked up 5 prizes for Best Male, Best North American Act, Best Collaboration with a couple of others, Biggest Fans and Best Look. Well done him. Thanks for watching BBC World News.
Got some fairly unsettled weather on both sides of the Mediterranean to start the new week. It's been pretty stormy in the eastern Med recently, just easing down the winds a little bit, but still quite breezy, choppy seas and maybe not quite so much rain. Further west, well, we're going to see gale force winds around the northwest of Spain, the western coast of Portugal, big seas and some rain moving its way